Perhaps we can move on to explore a little more what the settlements have actually done to the countryside. And you could give us your reactions and perhaps read a passage from the book. There are many wonderful passages in the book, but there is a fantastic one about this.
Through my work with Al-Haq as a human rights activist and as a lawyer, I was aware, maybe even more before most people were aware, of the legal changes that were being carried out. Israel, interestingly enough, is very legalistic. They would be very careful to put into a law, and in this case a military order, any changes that they want to make. And although the settlements, and I must say this, although if I go too far, you can tell me, the settlements began, Israeli settlements in the occupied territories began a few months after the beginning of the occupation. Whether it was the Labour government or the Likud government, there has always been settlements built. The only difference between the two governments was where the settlements would be located. From 1967 until 1979, many settlements were built, although there were not many settlers, but there wasn't a structure for these settlements. They didn't figure out many legal issues, which were very difficult legal issues, such as how to have Israelis live outside of the borders of Israel, namely in the occupied territories, and be considered as living in Israel for the purposes of income tax, for the purposes of the welfare benefits, and so on. At the same time, in order for the settlement project to proceed, they had to have a separation between the settlers living in the occupied territories and the rest of the population, namely the Palestinian population living in the occupied territories. And so they had to work out solutions for these legal issues. And it was after 79 and after the arrangement with the peace agreement with Egypt that the Begin government began to work out problems, legal problems, and restructure the whole thing. And they started publishing the projects and the schemes for creating large changes and more settlements. And so as I was walking around the beginning of the 1980s, I was thinking of what effect the building of these huge numbers of settlements, which were going to mean the expenditure of billions of dollars and infrastructure, roads, the whole thing, how all of this is going to affect our hills. And I was very worried, of course, about this. And so the second walk is involved with these fears that I had and a description of a land case that I was pursuing. But before we go any further, let me read a section from the second walk to give you some idea of how I go about it in this book of walking and introducing issues that are of a legal nature and of political nature as well. For those who have the book, I'm going to read a short piece from page 52. And I will stand up so that this is really better. I don't know it by heart. I had ventured into a fascinating area. Not far from the terrace wall, tall as an altar, I saw a large rock that seemed out of place, as though it had fallen from on high. It was cracked in a number of places. I rested my elbows on it and examined it more closely. The sun was striking it at a 30-degree angle. Engraved in the rock were two elongated lobes, one on each side, with a long mound like a giant toe between them. The whole thing was about a meter in length. At first I thought these shapes must have been made by water running down the rock over many years. But why would water make circular grooves? I had once seen pictures of dinosaur footprints. The similarity here was striking. I lifted my eyes and tried to imagine an enormous animal standing with one foot over this rock, its head almost reaching the top of the hill, overlooking Ramallah. Before moving away from the rock, I made sure to remember its location. Several terraces down from the pine trees, halfway between the top of the hill and the valley, in a field full of the common thistle called nettish, boterium thorn, which is likely used to make the crown of thorns worn by Christ. Nettish is as plentiful in these hills as heather in the Scottish Highlands. Both are tenacious plants with strong roots. In winter, nettish requires thick, narrow leaves that conserve water. The fields are full of small, green mounds, not unlike porcupines. As the dry summer months advance, the leaves eventually dry up and fall off, leaving humps of wiry mesh that farmers sometimes cut and use as a broom to clean coarse surfaces of pebbles and stones. In Israeli military courts, this weed has gained great popularity. Never has a weed been more exploited and politicized, not least by Danny Kramer, the legal advisor to the Israeli military government responsible for expropriating Palestinian land for Jewish settlements. Danny knew few Arabic words. Nettish was one of them. How often I have heard him stand up before the judge in a military land court and declare, "But your honor, the land is full of nettish. I saw it with my own eyes." Meaning, what more proof could anyone want that the land was uncultivated and therefore public land that the Israeli settlers could use as their own? Alongside then, another hero of the settlement project, whom I had heard a lot about but never met, was Rabbi Kook. He once described to his disciples how his identification with the land was so total that he felt his own body torn. It is not clear to me whether or not the land in question was replete with nettish. Surely not. He was speaking metaphorically of much more profound things. It was the night of 14 May 1967, just before the war that resulted in the occupation of the Palestinian territories, the eve of Israel's Independence Day, and the anniversary of the UN resolution that gave its state its legal standing. As he delivered his sermon, he began to shout, and his body was rocked by grief. He was recalling the announcement in 1947, 20 years earlier, when the UN decided to partition Palestine into a Jewish and an Arab state. While the Jews in Palestine danced in the streets, the rabbi sat alone, bewailing the division of the land. He asked his disciples, "Where is Hebron? Have we forgotten it? And where is our Shechem, Nablus, and our Jericho? Will we forget them? And the far side of Jordan, it is ours, every clod of soil, every region and bit of earth belonging to the Lord's land. Is it in our hands to give up even a millimeter?" In that state, he said, "My entire body is shaking, entirely wounded and cut to pieces. I could not celebrate." When I read this, I thought, God help us. But for now, I was not going to think any more of Rabbi Kook and his body, or of Danny and his legal fetish for nettish. I was going to enjoy my walk.